My name is Madeline Ross. I'm 32 years old, live in Chicago, and I help people heal from trauma through art. But there's a kind of wound I've never managed to stitch together, being treated like a stranger in my own family. I was born into the Ross dynasty, 4 generations of physicians, surgeons, researchers, and award-winning medical pioneers. My father is Dr. Charles Ross, chief of neurosurgery, at one of the top hospitals in Illinois. My mother, Dr. Ellen Ross, is a pediatric oncologist. The two of them met at Johns Hopkins, fell in love in an anatomy lab, and raised their children to believe the only noble pursuit was medicine. My older brother, Michael, became a cardiologist. My cousin, Vivienne, an orthopedic surgeon. Even the youngest in the family, little Jeremy, just started his first year at med school. Then there's me, the black sheep with paint under her fingernails. When I turned down a full ride to study biology and instead chose a small liberal arts college with an art therapy program, the silence from my parents was louder than any argument. No fight, no tears, just a quiet resignation, as if they'd lost me to some shameful impulse they couldn't even name. Every summer, the Ross family gathers in Colorado Springs for the annual Ross Foundation Summit, a mix of medical conference, vacation, and family reunion. It's held at the Margaret Ross Wellness Institute, named after my great-grandmother, who, according to the legend, was one of the first women surgeons in the state. The retreat is where new Ross babies are introduced, where awards are presented, where research is celebrated. And for the past 7 years, I've been accidentally left off the guest list. They used to pretend it was just a numbers thing. Limited rooms, strict capacity foundation board priorities. I even told myself maybe they were right. Maybe a licensed art therapist who worked in trauma recovery wasn't medical enough. I buried the ache and kept busy helping sexual assault survivors, veterans with PTSD kids from war-torn countries. The irony wasn't lost on me. I helped strangers heal from exclusion while choking down my own. But this year, something snapped. It was a rainy Thursday evening when I saw the video. I had just wrapped a session with a teenage client and was scrolling mindlessly through social media when a sponsored post from the Ross Foundation popped up. It was a teaser for the upcoming summit. A glossy promotional video featuring my cousin Vivienne, standing in front of the Institute hair, perfectly styled voice confident. "Our family has always believed in legacy," she said, smiling. "From Margaret Ross to the present, no one in our lineage has ever strayed from the mission of healing through science and medicine." The camera panned to a wall of portraits. I recognized every face: my great-grandmother, my father, uncles, aunts, cousins. My own image wasn't there. But that wasn't what made my stomach clench. It was what Vivienne said next. "This year, we celebrate unity. Every living member of the Ross family remains committed to the field of medicine. It's a tradition we proudly carry forward." It was subtle, but it was a lie, a deliberate erasure. I paused the video, replayed that sentence. Every living member. No mention of me, no acknowledgement that I existed. I wasn't even worthy of being a footnote. My chest tightened. My ears rang. I sat frozen on my couch, drenched in a cocktail of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like no matter what you do, you're just not seen, give this video a like. Let's not stay silent anymore. The last time I had spoken to Vivienne was 4 years ago when she had accidentally submitted the same research proposal I'd been working on for an art therapy pilot program. She got the grant. I got silence. I clicked on the post. Over 100 comments of praise. Heart emojis. Ross legacy strong as ever. So proud of our clan. See you all in Colorado. I opened the event page. Confirmed attendees, 143. Venue capacity, 130. So they'd added overflow lodging this year. My name was nowhere on the guest list. Not only had they erased me, they had expanded the event. There was space, Plenty of it. Just not for me. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes blurred. That night, I called Grace my best friend and former grad school roommate. She now ran a trauma-informed yoga center and was the closest thing I had to a sister. They finally said it out loud, I told her. What, that I don't belong? Not in so many words, but they filmed a whole segment to announce my erasure. Grace was silent for a beat, then said with quiet certainty, Maddie, it's not that you don't belong. It's that you make them uncomfortable. You remind them that healing doesn't only wear a white coat. I let her words sit with me. I wanted to scream, to storm into the retreat and shout, I exist, but then what? Beg for scraps at a table I was never invited to. I spent the next day in a fog. Every glance at my phone reignited the fury. The narrative they were telling of unity of medicine as the only legitimate healing wasn't just false. It was dangerous. It erased not only me, but the thousands of people like me who heal through creativity, emotion, and expression. Has your way of healing ever been dismissed just because it didn't look official? Leave a comment and share your story. This space is for you too. And somewhere in that quiet fury, an idea was born. Not revenge, not confrontation, creation. If I wasn't invited to their table, I'd build my own. That night, I opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote, Retreat for the Uninvited, a space for healing outside their rules. I stared at the words. It sounded petty, but it didn't feel petty. It felt necessary. What if I organized a retreat? A gathering of therapists, creatives, survivors, people who heal in ways the Ross family refused to acknowledge. What if it took place at the exact same time, in the exact same mountains? Not to compete, not to insult, but to claim space. Our space. I ran the idea by Grace over coffee the next morning. Her face lit up. Oh, hell yes, she grinned. Finally, you're reclaiming the story. That night, I looked through old family memorabilia. At the bottom of a dusty box, I found something unexpected. A charcoal sketch signed M. Ross, 1934. The initials matched my great-grandmother, but the signature wasn't on a medical journal or a foundation charter. It was a drawing, a woman in profile, eyes closed, surrounded by wildflowers. A tear fell from one eye. Had Margaret Ross, matriarch of the medical dynasty, been an artist, my pulse quickened. I flipped the sketch over. There was a note scribbled in pencil. To heal is to feel. Never forget that. I sat down on the floor, breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just my story. This was hers too. They erased me, but maybe they'd erased her first. And that was when I knew the retreat wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about restoration. By the next morning, the storm inside me had settled into something sharper clarity. I'd been pushed to the margins for so long, I'd forgotten I could exist at the center of my own story. I started researching venues in Colorado Springs, not lodges or fancy resorts, but places with warmth and intention, spaces that felt like they were built for listening, for breathing, for art, in silence, in messy transformation. I found it 2 hours into the search. Aspen Hollow, an old artist residency tucked at the foot of Cheyenne Mountain. 6 cottages, an open-air barn studio, a fire circle, and a glass-walled meditation hall with panoramic forest views. It had once belonged to a watercolorist and his partner, a poet. Now it was run by a queer collective that hosted retreats year-round. The week I wanted, late July, same week as the Ross Foundation Summit, was open. I stared at the calendar. The price tag was steep, but not impossible. I'd been saving to replace my car. This felt more urgent. I sent a deposit request. An hour later, my phone pinged. Booking confirmed. I sat in silence, the weight of that moment pressing into my ribcage. I was doing it. I wasn't just reacting. I was creating. On my terms. I called Grace again, pacing around my apartment. We're doing this, she asked. We're doing this. By the next morning, we were co-planners. Grace suggested we call it the Wild Mend Retreat, a space to gather all those who healed outside the sterile definitions of science, a place for grief to breathe, for joy to sneak in through cracked windows, for stories to be told without apology. We built an invite list together. Therapists, artists, breathwork guides, trauma counselors, writers, doulas, former clients who had become colleagues. 22 names in total. All women, queer folks, people of color, those who'd been labeled alternative or fringe, yet whose work saved lives. Every name I typed reminded me that legacy didn't belong to the loudest voices. It lived in the quiet work done in shadowed rooms. That weekend, I designed a brand identity for the retreat, earth-toned, textural warm. A logo made of overlapping brushstrokes in the shape of an open palm. I built a simple website, sent digital invitations, created a password-protected landing page so no one from the Ross camp could accidentally stumble upon it. I wrote to each invitee personally, not just logistics, but intention. You belong in spaces that see the full complexity of your work. You are not a footnote. You are the story. Within 3 days, 18 of the 22 had responded with yes. The remaining 4 followed soon after. Grace cried when the last confirmation came in. We've got ourselves a movement, she whispered. But the retreat needed more than space and people. It needed structure. So we built it. Each morning would begin with movement sunrise, yoga, walking meditations. Afternoons were for workshops, somatic art therapy, grief collage, forest journaling, a session on breaking family patterns through embodied practice. Evenings would be for fire food and story. No hierarchy, no keynote speaker, just shared wisdom. The food had to nourish as deeply as the sessions, so I reached out to an old client, Jules, a chef who specialized in ancestral cooking. They just wrapped a kitchen residency in New Mexico and were intrigued. Send me your menu vision, they texted. I've got a cauldron and no one to feed. Done. I added another layer: healing altars. Every guest would be invited to bring one object, a photo, an artifact, a piece of clothing, anything that represented what they were ready to release or reclaim. We'd place them on a central table in the barn. Let it become a mosaic of survival. One night, while organizing logistics, I got a text from my cousin Vivienne. You good, saw your post about healing the excluded, Shade noted. I stared at the screen, then typed back, actually yes, more than good. Building something beautiful. Hope the summit goes well. She left me on red. I didn't care. Because that same evening, as I was packing welcome kits, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Joanna, the youngest sister of my father, now living in Vermont, and long estranged from the core family. I heard what you're planning, her message read. Margaret would have loved this. She wasn't what they said she was, you know. I paused. She wasn't what they said she was. I replied, what do you mean? 15 minutes later, my phone rang. I've been waiting years to tell someone the truth. Joanna said, her voice hoarse. Your great-grandmother Margaret wasn't a surgeon. She trained in medicine, yes, but she left the profession after 2 years. She was a war nurse, saw too much horror, and turned to painting, healing people through color, through silence. But the institute funded by your great-grandfather, he built the myth, said she left practice to raise children. The family couldn't tolerate the idea of her walking away from medicine. So they rewrote her. I sat still, heart thudding. I found a whole sketchbook once Joanna continued. Her notes, her process. She believed healing was emotional spiritual. She never wanted a research hospital named after her. She wanted a sanctuary. A sanctuary. Not a summit, not a brand, not a monument to exclusion. I thought of the charcoal drawing I'd found. The tear, the wildflowers. I wasn't the first one erased. I had simply inherited the silence. Joanna offered to send me scans of the sketchbook. I agreed instantly. As soon as the first images came in, I cried. Margaret's handwriting was delicate looping. One note read, "Let the pain make marks. That's how we know it's real. That's how we find shape again." That night, I added a final element to the retreat. An exhibit wall in the barn. The unspoken legacy. Margaret's sketches would be printed and displayed. Alongside them, I'd include blank frame space for each participant to add their own legacy, their reclaimed story. By then, news had started to leak. Sylvia, a former client, turned trauma coach with 200K Instagram followers, posted a teaser, heading to the mountains for a week of radical healing, where therapists become artists again, and we write our own lineage. It went viral in our circles. I received a call from a podcast producer. A healing magazine editor asked for an interview. A local reporter wanted to cover it as an alternative retreat, reshaping the definition of healing. And then my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, her voice was tight, almost formal. "Madeline, we're hearing things about you creating a separate gathering. It seems disruptive. I hope you're not making a scene." A scene? No, I thought. I was making a space. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a private group message to the retreat attendees. "Dear ones, we're 10 days out. Pack loose clothes and open heart. And one object that carries your silence. We'll make it speak. Wild Mend is almost here." And with that, I closed my laptop, stood at my window, and watched the dusk fold into the city. A family had tried to erase me, but I had drawn myself back into the frame. Oh. I arrived at Aspen Hollow 2 days before the retreat was scheduled to begin. The air in Colorado was crisp, thinner than the city air I was used to, laced with pine and possibility. The road to the retreat curved through forest, and every turn felt like I was shedding a layer of someone else's expectations. The cabins stood like quiet sentinels among the trees, simple, wooden, beautifully imperfect. The barn studio sat in the center of the property, its massive doors flung open to let in the breeze. I stepped inside and saw the long table where we'd host our healing altar. The wood was worn smooth, the kind of surface that had held 1,000 stories already. I smiled. It was ready for more. Grace arrived that evening carrying a duffel bag and a massive box of handmade candles. I brought the scent of becoming. She grinned, holding one up. "Smells like lavender, lemon, and defiance." We unpacked slowly, deliberately. Welcome baskets were placed on each bed. Local, honey hand-bound journals. Soft scarves dyed with indigo. I slid a print of Margaret Ross's sketch into each one with a note on the back. "Your healing is not an afterthought. It's the foundation." By noon the next day, our guests began to arrive. Some came in rental cars, some carpooled from Denver. One woman, Tanya, flew in from Canada and took a taxi from the airport straight into the mountains. As they stepped onto the land, I saw something subtle but powerful: people relaxing into themselves. Shoulders dropped, eyes softened. Laughter came easy, even among strangers. Sylvia arrived in a flowing copper dress and wraparound sunglasses. She walked the space like it was a cathedral, murmuring, This is holy." Her presence lit a spark. By nightfall, her story about the retreat, posted live from her cabin, had over 50,000 views. "This isn't a wellness escape," she told her followers. "It's a reclamation zone." That first evening, we gathered in a circle on the grass, 22 of us. A collective of misfits and visionaries. Grace led a grounding meditation. Then I spoke. I was erased from a story I was born into. I said, voice steady. But instead of fighting for a seat at their table, I built my own. You are that table. This week, we remember that healing is not sterile. It is not linear. It is messy and loud and still and sacred. They nodded. Some cried. Some just closed their eyes, as if to finally exhale something they'd been holding for years. As the fire cracked behind us, Ethan arrived. I hadn't expected him. He was the site manager for Aspen Hollow, and we'd only exchanged logistics emails. But as he approached, he gave me a small, respectful nod. "Didn't realize you were building a revolution," he said. I laughed. Neither did I. He stayed to help with firewood. Later that night, I caught him listening intently as one of the participants described her work using dance to treat chronic grief. He wasn't just being polite. He was listening, truly listening. The next morning began with sunrise movement, led by Grace on the platform beneath the trees. Soft music drifted across the grounds. I stood at a distance for a while, just watching bodies moving slowly, arms outstretched, bare feet pressing into the earth like roots. Then we transitioned into our first workshop, Grief as Color. I guided the group through a silent process, choosing pigments not based on logic, but on instinct. What shade is the memory of loss? What texture is disappointment? Vivienne arrived that afternoon, unannounced. I was in the barn, prepping for the evening session, when she walked in her heels, clicking against the floorboards. "Nice place," she said. I turned slowly. "You're not on the guest list." "I know." She looked different, tired maybe. Or raw. No makeup. No armor. "I saw the photos," she continued. "Saw the sketch you sent. The one from Margaret. I didn't know." "No one did," I said, "because they never wanted us to." If this twist surprised you and you want more people to know the real story, hit share. Let the truth ripple. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. "Look, I know I've been awful to you. I followed the path because it was expected, because I thought that's how I'd stay safe. I didn't say anything." She took a deep breath. "But I'm not happy, Maddie. I haven't been happy for years. And when I saw what you built here, I realized you did the thing I never had the courage to do." Her voice broke. "I was angry at you because you stepped out of the story, and I stayed in it." I watched her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to shut the door, but another part, the part that knew what it felt like to carry shame and loneliness, nodded toward the open space. "There's a session starting in 20 minutes, I said. "You're welcome to stay. No special treatment. No titles. Just you." She stayed. That evening, we shared stories around the fire. Each person placed their symbolic item on the healing altar: a stethoscope, a graduation sash, a burned-out journal, a broken mirror. Things they were releasing, claiming, transforming. Vivienne placed a name tag, one from last year's Ross Summit, onto the table. "Dr. Vivienne Ross. I want to see who I am without this," she whispered. The retreat bloomed. In the days that followed, we painted with soil, danced under moonlight, screamed into the canyon. People cracked open, and no one looked away. We made clay masks, wrote letters to ancestors, burned old narratives in a copper bowl behind the barn. On the third night, I unveiled the unspoken legacy wall. Sketches of Margaret, letters from Joanna, photographs of the young artist she'd once been. Her handwriting looped across the pages like a lifeline. At the center, I placed a plaque. Margaret Ross was more than a myth. She was a creator, a healer of the unseen. May we remember her not as a symbol of medicine, but as a sanctuary of truth. Silence followed. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, reverently, the rest joined in. Later that night, I got a text from my father. "We need to talk. Things are being said. You've stirred confusion." I didn't reply, because what he called confusion, I called remembering. What he called disruption, I called reclamation. The retreat still had 2 days to go. But already I could feel the tectonic shift, not just in my family's version of truth, but in me. For the first time, I wasn't grieving my exclusion. I was living my inclusion. On the 5th morning of the retreat, I woke before dawn. The mountain air was cold sharp against my skin, but I didn't mind. I wrapped myself in a shawl and stepped out onto the meditation deck, where a few early risers sat in silence, watching the light crawl over the peaks. Vivienne joined me wordlessly. We hadn't spoken much since she arrived, but her presence had shifted. She no longer walked with the stiffness of someone defending herself. She listened, observed, absorbed. "You ready for today?" she asked, her breath visible in the air. I nodded. "I think so." Today was the closing ceremony of the Ross Foundation Summit, which meant tonight they would present the Legacy Award, the highest honor in the family. The award that had always gone to someone who preserved the mission of healing through medicine. This year, everyone assumed it would go to my father, or Michael, or Vivienne again. And yet rumors had started to ripple about me, about the retreat, about the real legacy of Margaret Ross. I hadn't planned to interfere. I really hadn't. But the more I looked at Margaret's sketches, her letters, her scratched-out poems, the more it felt like a betrayal to let her memory remain hijacked by a lie. I stood, walked back to the barn, and opened my laptop. Inside a folder titled The Archive, I had collected everything: the scans from Aunt Joanna, the charcoal portrait I'd found, and a recently recovered audio recording, an old cassette my aunt had converted to digital. It was dated March 1981, a year before Margaret died. In it, she spoke softly, hesitantly, but the words were unmistakable. They wanted me to be a surgeon. I tried, for a while, but the blood never left me. The screams, the eyes, I still see them. So I painted. I stitched wounds with brushes instead of scalpels. It was still healing, but they never forgave me for leaving. They rewrote me, and I let them. That line undid me. They rewrote me, and I let them. I had done the opposite. I had refused the rewrite. But it wasn't enough to reclaim just for myself. Not anymore. Vivienne watched me from across the barn. "You're going to send it, aren't you?" I nodded. "It deserves to be heard. She deserves it." An hour later, I emailed the entire board of the Ross Foundation, including my father, mother, uncles, aunts, and cousins. Subject: a different kind of healing. The true legacy of Margaret Ross. I attached the audio file, a brief essay explaining what we had uncovered, and a simple message. "Tonight, as you present another award in her name, I ask you to remember who she really was. Not who you needed her to be, but who she chose to be. I will not attend. I don't need to. Her voice will be there without me." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. That afternoon, the Wildmend Retreat held its final full-day sessions. Grace led a group breathwork circle beneath the trees. Ethan built a clay oven with 2 of the participants who wanted to bake their way through grief. In the barn, Sylvia facilitated a group dialogue titled Unmothered Daughters and Women from 4 Generations, shared stories of maternal absence, silence, shame. The altar had overflowed. Someone had started a second table, a third. Artifacts of trauma transformed into sacred markers. At dusk, we gathered again for a closing fire. I felt a stillness in the group. Something sacred had been touched, the kind of quiet that only comes after shared unraveling. As we passed around a carved wooden bowl of rose tea, someone's phone buzzed, then another and another. A murmur began. Sylvia glanced down at her screen and froze. "Madeline," she whispered, "you need to see this." I hesitated, then took her phone. A live stream from the Ross Foundation Summit had just ended, but the final 5 minutes had already gone viral. A shaky recording was circulating, One of the guests had filmed the moment on their phone. The setting was elegant. A ballroom in downtown Colorado Springs. Suits, gowns, string quartet. The foundation president stood at the podium. And now, before we present this year's Legacy Award, he'd said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "We'd like to share a short message from Dr. Margaret Ross herself." A hush. The lights dimmed. And then her voice, that gentle, measured cadence. "They rewrote me, and I let them." Gasps, murmurs, some people standing, some sitting motionless. The video ended just before the chaos began. I stared at the phone numb. Someone had played the tape, publicly, at the summit. I hadn't expected that. I'd hoped maybe for a quiet acknowledgement, a footnote. But someone, maybe Vivienne, had gone further. And the story was now out in the open. I looked up at the circle. 21 pairs of eyes watched me, not waiting for an answer, just witnessing. "She wanted to be seen," I said simply. "Now she is." Grace took my hand. "She wouldn't have done it without you." I wasn't sure that was true, but I was sure she wouldn't have been heard without us. Later that night, as I helped clear dinner dishes from the barn, headlights appeared in the distance. A car slowly pulled into the gravel lot, then stopped. My breath caught. My father stepped out. My mother followed. They both looked different, smaller, older. Vivienne exited the back seat behind them. No one spoke. I walked toward them, slow, measured. "You came," I said. "We saw the video," my mother said softly. "We didn't know," my father added. "She tried to tell you," I said. "And so did I." He nodded. "Yes, and we didn't listen." For once, no defensiveness, no explanation, just silence. Vivienne stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I sent it to the board," she said. "I didn't think they'd actually play it, but they did." "Thank you," I whispered. My father looked toward the barn where the last flames of the evening fire flickered. "Can we see it?" he asked. I nodded. I led them inside. The unspoken legacy wall was still lit by lanterns. Sketches, letters, her words. My mother stared at one in particular, a page of red flowers and tangled black ink. "She was an artist," she murmured. "She was," I said. "And you are too," my father added. His voice cracked. "We spent so long pretending that wasn't enough." "It was never about being enough," I said. "It was about being true." He nodded slowly. "We failed you. Her. All of it." I watched his shoulders sag under the weight of the words. It was the first time he'd ever admitted fault without flinching. "I don't know how to fix it," he said. "You don't," I replied. "But you can stop trying to rewrite it." My mother looked at me. "Would you consider, next year, bringing Wild Men to the Institute as a partnership? We want to start over." I shook my head gently. "Not as a partnership," I said, "but maybe as a week of truth. 1 week a year to honor who she really was. On her land, in her name. No more lies." My father extended his hand. "Deal." I took it, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman setting the terms of her legacy. The morning after my parents visited the retreat, the mountains were unusually quiet. The air held that post-rain stillness, as if the entire forest had taken a long breath and was now holding it waiting. Guests began packing up slowly. No one rushed. They lingered, drifting from one another like morning fog. Grace handed out little seed packets, wildflowers, native to Colorado, with the words, "Scatter what healed you," printed on the back. Ethan made fresh coffee and left mugs on the porch, then disappeared to load up the compost bins, his quiet way of saying goodbye. I stood in the barn for a long time after the last session ended, watching the empty chairs, the traces of pigment left on the tables, the pressed petals that had fallen from the altar onto the floor. This place was different now, not just because of what we'd done, but because of what we'd remembered. Margaret's sketches remained pinned to the exhibit wall. I would leave them up for a few more days, as requested by the Aspen Hollow staff. They wanted to show the space to a potential sponsor. People need to know what this place can hold, Ethan had told me. By late afternoon, most of the cars were gone. Only Grace and Vivienne stayed behind to help me with the last round of packing. Vivienne was quieter than usual, her usual edge dulled into something softer. "You think your dad meant it?" she asked suddenly. "That he really wants to change things?" "I think he meant it in the moment," I said honestly. "Whether that lasts is his work, not mine." Grace walked out carrying the last of the altar offerings in a velvet box. Vivienne followed her, but before she left, she turned back. "I'm not going back to the foundation," she said. "I've decided to take a leave, maybe a long one. Travel, paint, who knows?" "Good," I said. "Do it for her. Do it for you." She nodded, and in her eyes, I saw something unfamiliar relief. When they drove away, I stood alone on the porch and watched the sun fold behind the tree line. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. The weight had lifted, not because others had finally seen me, but because I no longer needed them to. That night, I stayed up late writing thank you notes. Not just the polite kind, but real ones. To Sylvia for using her voice. To Ethan for showing up fully. To Aunt Joanna for breaking the silence. To Grace for never letting me forget who I was, even when I almost did. And finally, to Margaret. If this story moved you, subscribe for more and explore the links in the description for voices reclaiming their place in the world. You painted when they wanted you to cut. You wept when they needed a mask. I see you now. I carry your brush forward. Back in Chicago, my apartment felt smaller somehow, though it hadn't changed at all. The framed sketch of Margaret now hung above my workspace. Her eyes closed in reflection reminded me daily that erasure does not mean absence. The fallout from the summit was slower than expected, but deeper. Several board members of the Ross Foundation stepped down. Donations dipped, then rose again this time from individuals who supported a more inclusive vision of healing. An open letter appeared in the Medical Arts Quarterly, authored by 5 younger Ross family members, calling for a redefinition of legacy. I wasn't part of those discussions. I didn't want to be. I was already somewhere else. Wild Mend had taken root. Emails poured in from past participants asking about next year. One woman offered to bring her husband a trauma-informed musician. Another wanted to donate instruments. Jules, our chef, proposed hosting a pop-up culinary healing night in Chicago. Grace and I formed a loose collective, artists, therapists, builders of sacred space. We didn't file for nonprofit status. We didn't look for funding. We just kept creating. In early October, I received a call from Dr. Layla Hahn, the new director of the Margaret Ross Wellness Institute. "I've been reviewing the original charter," she said, "and, well, it seems your great-grandmother left more writings than anyone realized. She envisioned the Institute as a place where science and spirit meet. We'd like to honor that." "What are you proposing?" I asked. 1 week per year, she said, dedicated to creative healing. Led by you, if you'll accept. You don't have to use the Ross name, just bring back the truth. I was quiet for a long time. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to feel what it meant to be asked, not told. To be invited, not demanded. To be seen. "Yes," I said. "On my terms." "Of course," she replied. "Only on your terms." The first planning meeting for next year's retreat took place in my studio. Grace brought sticky notes and tea. Ethan joined via Zoom. Vivienne, now based in Lisbon, called in to offer a session on unlearning inherited stories. Someone suggested a theme. I wrote it in thick black ink on the whiteboard. Nothing broken is beyond naming. 3 weeks before Christmas, I went to dinner at my parents' house. Just the 3 of us. No guest list, no foundation talk. My father didn't say much, but he didn't need to. He asked about the retreat, about the clay oven, about Ethan. My mother set a place for me at the head of the table. After dinner, she handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a pair of antique watercolor brushes. "They were hers," she said quietly. "Your Aunt Joanna found them and gave them to me. I think they should be with you. I ran my fingers across the worn wood handles. One still held a faint trace of blue. Thank you, I said. Not because the gesture fixed everything, but because it meant they'd stopped pretending nothing had been broken. We didn't hug that night, but when I left, my father stood on the porch and said, "See you at the next gathering." He didn't say which gathering. He didn't have to. A few months later, I received a letter from a retreat participant, handwritten on recycled paper, smudged with what looked like clay. Dear Madeline, before Wild Mend, I thought healing had to look like survival. Now, I know healing can look like art, like softness, like space. Thank you for making space for me, for all of us. Tanya. I placed the letter in a box labeled Truths to Keep. It now sits beside Margaret's brushes. My altar, my inheritance. Not in money, not in approval, but in what I chose to build from their silence. On the 1-year anniversary of the retreat, I returned to Aspen Hollow, alone. I didn't host a session. I didn't invite anyone. I just walked the property. The barn still smelled like pine and charcoal. The altar table was bare but clean. A new circle of stones had been added to the back garden. I sat there for a while watching birds skitter across melting snow. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the last item I'd been waiting to place, my old Ross family name tag. I buried it under the stones, not as a rejection, but as release. If you stayed until this moment, thank you. Subscribe to Walk with Madeline, not to rewrite what was lost, but to rebuild what was always hers.